Messiah's blood if you do that. You trample his blood, which paid for your lawlessness. When you turn your back on the law and go live lawless, after you received these revelations, then you trample his blood. Then his blood was not good enough for you. And then you will go to hell. You cannot be saved if you trample his blood. Verse 19. For I through the law died to the law, that I might live to Elohim. Important to know in this verse, another verse Christians try to use to say, you died to the law. They only say those words. They don't say the first part, that through the law. Because this is the point I'm making here. You're not dead to the law. The law is not done away with. This is not what the scripture says. It says through the law. How through the law? Through obeying the law, you died to the law. Now, what is he talking about here? He explains this in more detail in Romans chapter 7 and 8. Go read that. Chapter 7, Shaul talks about, uses himself as an example, and explains the salvation process. And he used himself as the example of a one trying to obey the law perfectly to be saved, but you cannot. In verse 14, 7 verse 14, he says that the carnal man cannot keep the spiritual law perfectly. That's what it says there. You cannot keep the spiritual law perfectly through the carnal man. Chapter 8, he starts with, but there are now no condemnation for those who are in Messiah Yahushua, who walk according to the Spirit and not according to the flesh. When you receive the Spirit, there are no more condemnation for you, because you walk according to the Spirit leading you, and not according to your flesh, your carnal man leading you anymore. That's when you accept Yahushua as your Messiah. You receive the Spirit. And verse 4 tells us that you now fulfill the law through the leading of the Spirit, and not through your flesh. And in that chapter he explains the two laws, the law of liberty and the law of sin and death. That if you daily let your carnal man lead you, then you fall under the law of sin and death. And this is what this verse means. You die to that law of sin and death when you obey the law of liberty, the law written on your heart. As the Spirit leads you daily to obey the law written on your heart, then you die to that law of sin and death. Then there are no judgments on you anymore. And even if you make a mistake then you can ask forgiveness, and that lawlessness can be forgiven again. So that you don't fall anymore under that law of sin and death, which come on you when you try to keep the law through your carnal man. You must obey the law through faith in Messiah Yahushua. As I explained before, faith without works is no faith at all. If I believe the chair that I'm sitting on is strong enough to hold my weight and I can sit on it, I prove that I believe this fact by sitting on the chair. That's the works that I do to prove that I believe. There's many examples like that. The same with salvation. To prove that you believe that Messiah died for your lawlessness and did away with it. You obey the law to prove that you asked him to wash you clean of your lawlessness. To prove that you turn away from your lawlessness, you obey the law. By that you show that you believe. So, verse 19, for I've been crucified with Messiah. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. He just explains also verse 19 here in verse 20, that what he is explaining in verse 20 is he was crucified. His carnal nature, his old man, was crucified, impaled with Messiah Yahushua. And it's not anymore him who lives, but now the Spirit of Messiah comes and lives in him. And through faith in the Spirit, through faith, yeah, there's the word faith again. Faith and works goes together. And through faith, meaning obeying the law through faith in Messiah, the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of Elohim, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Yahushua died in vain. He says here that he does not set aside the grace of Elohim. The grace is the ability we receive to obey the law, as I said earlier. Titus 2 verse 11 and 12. And then he says, for if right standing with Elohim comes through the law, if I'm declared righteous by keeping the law perfectly, then Messiah did die in vain. That's what he says here. If I are saved through the law, obeying it perfectly, and I'm saved because I'm a perfect man, then Yahushua did die in vain, because I could keep the law perfectly through the flesh. Why did he die then for my lawlessness? And that's the fact that he wants to make here, that Messiah had to die for our lawlessness, because we cannot, through the flesh, keep the law perfectly. We will make mistakes in our lives. We need forgiveness for those lawlessness, because one mistake is enough to send you to hell. One mistake, as you try to obey the law and you make a mistake, you are condemned to hell. You fall under the law of sin and death. Sin bringing forth eternal death. But through Messiah, through faith in Him, you are released, set free from, and you die to the law of sin and death. And you are now under the law of liberty, law of choices. You must make the right choice daily to keep the commandments as the Spirit leads you. I hope this makes sense. This is chapter 2. So we see here that Shaul used the example of what Peter did wrong and the Jews that came with him as the foundation of the rest of his message concerning these false teachers, who also separate themselves from these Galatians to try to put them under peer pressure, so that they will convert to their lies, so that they will go and get themselves circumcised in the flesh and try to obey the law through the flesh perfectly, which they cannot. And that's why Shaul mentioned what we see, that Shaul uses this example of Kepha and the other Jews who sinned, who separated themselves. He used this example to help and explain what these other Jews does wrong. These other false teachers who came to this congregation and taught them to get circumcised in the flesh. He used this example to show them that you are not saved by getting circumcised in the flesh. And he also showed them that it is wrong for these other Jews to come to them and separate themselves from these new Gentile converts. That is a wrong thing to do, because they place them under the peer pressure and try to let them convert that way, telling them you're not saved yet, so you cannot join our group until you get yourself circumcised in the flesh. And only when they do that, then they say, oh, you can join our group now. You have been circumcised in the flesh, so you are saved now. That's the wrong message. And that's why Shaul used this example of what Peter did.